Well, we are continuing in our series, the larger series, Walking with Yeshua through the Gospel of Luke, and our current mini-series entitled Untrained. As we, becoming apprentices of Yeshua, are not only being trained to carry out his purposes, his mission in the world, but in reality, what we're going through is the difficult process of being untrained, unlearning the deeply ingrained patterns of thinking and being and living that have characterized and defined us at the deepest level of our being for so long. The title of the message this morning is Loving Like Our Father. Loving like the Father. Over the past couple of years, there are certain words that we use that we've used them for so long that they have meaning, and yet they're like religious words. And one of those words is sin. People say, whatever happened to sin? Nobody preaches sin anymore. And people do preach sin. They like to preach about the sin that's not their sin. They like to preach about somebody else's sin. It makes them feel better. But sometimes the word sin makes it sounds like something that is out there. And we kind of redefined or looked at sin with new language that kind of boils it down to what we call me-ness, me-firstness. For every human being, me, self, is at the center of everything. That's our natural orientation. That everything starts from here out. That's the way I see the world. That's the way I know the world. What is most natural for each of us? The most natural thing is to always seek what's best for me. How does this benefit me? What's in it for me? In fact, we are naturally self-serving, self-seeking, self-exalting. We defend ourselves. We naturally look to make things work out for our own benefit. We are in pursuit of our own pleasure, our own comfort, our own enrichment, our own reputation. And on some level, even as I list those things, there's a voice within that says, well, yeah, of course we are. It's only natural that I look out for me, right? But that voice within, it's not the voice of an outsider. That's not the voice of the devil. That's the voice of me and you for as long as we've been walking this earth. It's the voice that's been driving us since before we could form words, before I could form thoughts that were made of words. The earliest drive within me, the earliest instinct within me was oriented toward my way, toward self and only self. Babies do not defer. Babies don't naturally take turns. They don't think, well, it really isn't my turn. Now is it? You go. Our most natural instinct is mine. But that instinct, though it's all we've ever known, is not how we were made or intended to be. It's a distortion of who we were made to be. We were made to reflect our Heavenly Father, and He is loving and He is giving, and His love and His giving is outwardly oriented, not inwardly focused. God's love pours out. God's love gives. That me-first instinct is not a reflection of God's character. It's a reflection of a different character. It's a reflection of a deceiver. We were abducted by a deceiver, right? We had our father, and we were abducted, raised by a deceiver who sought to exalt himself. We've been raised in the likeness of the one who said in Isaiah 14, I will ascend to heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of meeting in the uttermost parts of the north. I will ascend above the high places of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High, like Elyon. So when someone says, if you don't look out for yourself, who will? No one has to explain that to you. Right? If I say, you got to look out for yourself, you're not like, that doesn't make sense. What does that mean? You're like, well, of course. It's natural. We get it. We immediately get that. It instinctively makes sense. At the core of our distorted nature, we understand that. We understand it. When someone says, look, your personal happiness is what matters, that resounds within us. Yes. When something happens bad to another person and we think, I'm just glad it didn't happen to me. Right? No one has to explain that. It's only natural. Self first is our natural orientation. So Yeshua, the Lord actually says, he says, so start loving your neighbor like you love yourself. Love others the way you love you. And it doesn't mean we're not to love ourselves, right? It doesn't mean we're to go around hating ourselves. We were created in the image of God. But his love is outward oriented, and he then begins telling us to, hey, prefer others. As we move through the Gospel of Luke, we've come to this place in Luke chapter 6 where Yeshua begins to express things in such a way that it does not sound natural at all. We have to explain it. He's going to sum up, eventually in Luke chapter 9, he'll sum up much of what he's trying to teach his apprentices, his protégés, his disciples who are not just learning to know, but he's teaching them because he's going to send them out to do and to be. We are to be the body of Messiah on earth, filled with the Spirit of God. So we're not only to just do the things that he says to do, but in the process of doing, becoming who he made us to be. We get so stuck on the doing, on the actions, but the actions are supposed to flow forth from something, from a transformation that's happening within. In Luke chapter 9, verse 23, Yeshua says, if anyone wants to follow me, he must do the most unnatural thing possible. He must deny himself, take up his cross every day, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. My kids are so sick of the phrase dying to self. I have to find new ways to express it so it doesn't just become a cliche. Because it is to be the posture of who we're becoming. Before we get to that summary in Luke chapter 9, let's look at more of what Yeshua says in more detail as we continue through what's called the Sermon on the Plain, or the teaching on level ground. We know about the Sermon on the Mount. This is the Sermon on the Plain, the teaching on level ground. Here in Luke 6, Yeshua has chosen his apprentices, right, from among a much larger group of his followers. And then, having chosen these guys that are now going to be his 12, rather than staying on the mountain with them, rather than conveying to them something that they're along the lines that their chosenness exalts them above the rabble down below, Yeshua brings them down the mountain, brings them down to level ground among the people. And he heals the hurting and broken, not just the broken from among Israel, not just the outsiders from the insiders, but he goes and begins to heal those from Tyre and Sidon we talked about last week. He begins to heal the outsiders of our enemies. He begins, before he says love your enemies, he already expresses it and shows it and begins to heal those who are hurting and broken. And he's untraining us, untraining his followers from their self-exaltation. Come down from the mountain. He's untraining them from their self-insulation. It's just us, just our group. And then he lowers himself even further so that as he's teaching them, he's looking up at them. He looks around. He's healed these people. And again, people have traveled for over 100 miles, many of them. Hurting, broken. They're not the best of the best in the world's estimation. And he looks around at them and he says, see these? You're blessed when you're poor. You're blessed when you're hungry. You're blessed. He begins to redefine life's blessings and life's woes. He begins saying things that you go, that doesn't sound true. That doesn't feel true. Are you trying to kind of shake things up here a little bit? He begins to redefine blessings, untraining them from an earthbound perspective towards seeing reality from God's perspective. A perspective that sees that those who are truly blessed are those who have gone through whatever it takes, be it poverty, be it sickness, be it persecution, rejection. Those who come to the place that they recognize, I am not and I need to be transformed. They're blessed. He says, woe to you when life is so good, when you're so comfortable, when you're so rich, when people are applauding you, when everything that you have, that you never stop to go, Lord, what do you need to do in me? In that place, woe to you. He's not saying to pursue poverty. He's saying that when we go through the brokenness of life, when we go through the circumstances that bring us to a place that we can see our need for God, we're blessed. But see, I have to explain that, because when you say it in just the way he says it, you're not like, oh, well, of course, blessed are you when you're poor and hungry and when people say bad things about you. He actually says, rejoice and jump for joy when they persecute you for my name. And you're like, do you mean that? I mean, are you serious? When someone says, take care of yourself, don't have to explain that. That's natural. But when you say you're blessed when you're poor and hungry, rejoice and jump for joy when people persecute you, we're like, yay, congrats to me. Woe to you when you're rich and satisfied and laughing and applauded. Yes. Say again. Woe to me when I'm rich. I said it last week, but it makes me think of Tevye when the guy says, riches are the world's curse. And Tevye goes, then may he smite me with them, and may I never recover. It's one of my favorite lines. Nobody hears that and says, well, of course, that makes total sense, totally natural. Someone needs to explain it. And then it gets harder from there. In fact, to me, one of the hardest parts of Scripture is this next section. This next area where Yeshua begins training / untraining us. It's some of his most well-known teaching. It's a passage that we seek to immediately explain away so that we can say, yes, I agree with that, but somehow not have to live it. You'll see what I'm talking about. Verse 27 of Luke chapter 6. But I say to you who are listening, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for the ones who mistreat you. To the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from the one who takes your cloak, don't hold back your shirt. Give to everyone who asks you. And whoever takes something of yours, make no demands on him. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners, even me first people, love those who love them. If you do good to those who are doing good to you, what credit is that to you? Even me first people do that. If you lend to those from whom you expect to take, what credit is that to you? Even sinners, even me first oriented people lend to other me first oriented people in order to receive back the same. But love your enemies and do good and lend and expecting nothing in return. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons, children of Elyon, children of the Most High. He is kind to the ungrateful and evil ones. Be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate to you. I think it's got to be one of the most unnatural passages of Scripture. It's one of the most difficult passages. Someone might say this is an easy passage to preach. It's not an easy passage to preach. Because it's something that has to be preached in this real broken world. And how do we approach this and honor this passage and not just explain it away, turn it into a metaphor that I don't have to obey? And at the same time, it's been used in so many ways for so long to keep people in cycles of abuse. What is it? What is he calling us to do here? I don't get it. You know, when I was a kid, my dad would give me he would tell me to do something, and, you know, I was a why kid. If I didn't understand, I would say why. I don't understand why. And there are two different whys. You know, there's the why of defiance. Why? You don't really want to understand. You don't like the command, and so you just go, why? But there's also why. Why? I don't understand. Why can't I? And there were times when my dad would explain to me, and there were times that even if he explained it, I didn't get it, and so I just had to do it. But what I love here is that Yeshua is teaching his apprentices. He's come to them with instructions that he knows that for you to operate in this is the most unnatural command possible. Let me tell you something. There's nothing natural about turning the other cheek. Not in my nature. I don't know about yours, but not mine. I have a retaliatory fire that burns deep within that has to die. But Yeshua jumps right to the why of it because he knows he's asking us something crazy. Why would I do what you just said? He says, because when you do this, it's when you act this way that you're being like your Father in heaven. When you do this, you will be children of the Most High. For he is kind and ungrateful, kind to the ungrateful and evil ones. Be compassionate just as your Father is compassionate to you. You know, as a kid too, people would say, you know, someone would go, well, he's his father's son. And that was always the dumbest thing to me. I was always like, of course I'm my father's son. What are you talking about? That's like, you know, but it meant I was, in the way that I was behaving, I was reflecting my father's character. You can see his father's character in him. If it was my stubbornness or whatever it was, he's his father's son, you know. But what we want them to see is that when they look at us and the way that we respond, he's his father's child. That's his father's daughter. That's her father's daughter. That's his father's son. That's what God is like. When you and I hear the wisdom of the kingdom of this world, get what's yours, look out for you, self, self, self. That's the logic of our abductor, the one who stole us and abused us and distorted us. But our Father is kind to the ungrateful and evil ones. Our Father, the one whose likeness we were intended to reflect, is compassionate. Be like him. And it's in that moment when I'm honest with myself about who I'm most like in the depths of my nature that I call on God to transform me, because I'm not like that naturally. I have to grit my teeth through turning the other cheek. It's not natural for me. But my prayer is I don't want to just act lovingly toward my neighbors. I want to come to the place where turning the other cheek is not simply something I do because I have to, and I'm furious and filled with rage inside, but I will obey and go ahead and hit the other cheek. And I'll give a death stare, and fire is within me, and I want to hit you. That's in me. I'm telling you, it's in me. And it can be poked, and that dude can show up That's not who I want to be. I don't want to just act lovingly. I want to be loving. I want to become someone who can turn the other cheek naturally, who doesn't feel the need to retaliate. As Yeshua teaches his apprentices here, he's untraining us from our self-oriented instinct to, first of all, to defend self and retaliate against others. I say to you who are listening, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for the ones who mistreat you. To the one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. From the one who takes your cloak, don't hold back your shirt. Give to everyone who asks you, and whoever takes something of yours, make no demands upon him. When I honestly wrestle with this passage, I wrestle with it because, like I mentioned a little bit ago, it's been misused to hold people hostage in ongoing emotionally, physically, and otherwise abusive relationships. Keep turning the other cheek. Keep being abused and misused. Is the godly thing to stay in an abusive relationship? Is that what Yeshua is calling us to do? And am I compromising? Am I twisting the word because I'm not comfortable with that when I say I don't believe that's what he's calling us to do? Because I don't want to just, because I don't believe it, I still have to say, well, what is he saying? Because I want to be obedient to him and not just say, I'm going to form him into my likeness. If I don't agree with that, then I'm going to twist it to say what I want it to say. I have to honestly wrestle with what he's calling me to here. Because I've sat with people behind closed doors who've described to me abuse that I didn't know existed. And I would never say, well, you just stay there and keep getting abused. Every situation is different. But I don't believe the Lord is calling us to a life of being abused. And again, at the same time, it's also true that Yeshua himself was physically abused to the point of death, fully living out exactly what he preached here. So I'm just laying out here before my honest wrestling match. Is that okay with you? Because I don't want to just come to you with neat little packaged things. This is a very difficult passage. This is a very difficult thing he asks of us here. I don't want to turn it into a metaphor. Lord, what are you calling us to do? In our self-oriented nature, we naturally want to make it about the technicalities. When I was a kid, here's what I did. I was like, well, he said turn the other cheek. Hit me once, hit me twice, now we're on. Now I could legalistically describe, and then now you've hit me twice. So that's kind of what Peter came, right? He's like, hey, I forgave him 7 times. What do you say? Pretty good, huh? And Yeshua says, multiply that times 70, which is basically like infinity. And you're like, what? That's not natural. You're going to need to explain that to me. How much do I let them take before I fight back? How much do I let them smear my name before I defend myself? Yeshua's just talked about those who were persecuted for his name's sake. And he says, when they strike you, when they malign your name, you'll want to strike back. You'll want to call down fire from heaven. A little later in Luke chapter 9, Jacob and John go to where Elijah had called down fire from heaven, and they get rejected there. And they come back, and they say, hey, they rejected us. Do you want us to go call fire down from heaven? And Yeshua said, that's not the way we do it. Not so with you. That's not our MO. In Luke 22, when they came to arrest Yeshua, Yeshua's leading apprentice figures okay, enough of this. You're not taking him. Oh, and he grabs the sword, and we know it's Peter from John's account, and he cuts off the high priest, the servant of the high priest's ear. And Yeshua answered, "Stop this now." And he put the ear back on, and he healed him. The Lord isn't calling us, I don't believe, to live in a state of perpetual abuse. Look, I know this is used to torment people. You want to break it down to easy black and white and have no idea. No idea. I know people who are in this room going, what do I do with this? Because their pain and their abuse is so deep you can't even begin to fathom. I didn't know it existed. What do you mean? What do I do here? I believe this. He is calling us in the face of abuse to not abuse back. That when we are struck, we don't strike. When we are mistreated, we don't mistreat. When we are robbed, we don't now justify robbing as retaliation to get them back. They deserve it. I'll do to them what they did to me, and it feels good. That's not what we are. That we don't pattern our responses after those whose actions are patterned by the evil one. When we go, when I see people do things, I go, wait a minute, someone did that to you, you didn't like that, and they go, well, they did it, and if they can do it, we may as well too. I hear people justify all kinds of garbage with that. But it's not just about me not retaliating. Honestly, it's about, Lord, bring me to a place where in my heart I don't desire to retaliate. When they act like the evil one, that I want to be like the loving one. How is that even possible? Is it even possible? I'll tell you, I'm not there yet. I'm far from there. The flesh is alive. And I know that because if you strike my face, I will bite down hard. And no guarantees yet. But I'm working on it. If you malign my name, if you lie about me, mistreat me, steal from me, there's something in me that desires to at least defend, if not to retaliate. I'm not there yet. But I believe he calls us to something that is entirely possible, to be transformed into who he made us to be. And because it seems so unnatural, so counterintuitive, there's a very strong element of me that doesn't want to become that. You just keep turning the other cheek? That seems weak, pal. There's a part of me, I used to fight all the time. I'm 5'7.5". People thought they could push me around. So I learned the way of the world. I learned that punching bullies in the mouth makes them not mess with you more. I learned the way of the world. And yet, it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it okay. He's untraining us from that natural inclination, that self-oriented inclination to defend self and then to retaliate, that there would be anger and hatred in our hearts to inflict pain rather than to love. He's also untraining us from the burden of needing our way. Untraining us from the burden of needing my way. Luke chapter 9, if you want to follow after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross every day, and follow me. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. That paradox right there. Whoever wants to save his life will release it, but whoever will lose it, but whoever will release his life for my sake will gain it, will save it. Our desire is to be transformed, to be changed, to truly be changed, not to just be acting lovingly, but to become loving, to be changed from the inside out. A lot of believers, and especially in our nation, because you can walk the walk here, you can be believers here and not have it tested. And so we talk about seeing lives changed, and yet it's a real surface thing that we're talking about, because when you go into the homes of so many believers, life hasn't changed. It's just a surface cover-up. It's not a transformation. And we're okay with that. We become okay with just putting on the show. We don't wrestle with our own desires, our own motivations. We say, well, I did this when I would be argue and be awful to my wife. I did this because you did this and you did that and you did this. And I would justify everything. And the Lord began to deal with me about who he was calling me to be. We keep loving those who love us the way we want to be loved. We keep loving our friends and hating those who hurt us. We use nice words. We go, I love them. I love them, okay? But we don't. But we treat them with hatred. We say things to let ourselves off the hook. I love them, I just don't like them. We're lying to ourselves. We're self-deceiving. If you love those who love you, big stinking deal. What credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who are doing good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. If you lend to those from whom you expect to take, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same. Do we want to give lip service to being transformed into the likeness of Yeshua, or do we truly desire to be transformed? That's what I want. I want to want what he wants. I want to respond increasingly and more naturally in the way that Yeshua would respond. When he laid it all down, when they mocked him, when they ripped at his beard and caused excruciating pain, when he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He wasn't gritting his teeth, going, forgive them. In the midst of it, he looked at them with the love of the Father. I want to become that. And yet it's scary, because it makes us vulnerable to people who would do what they did to him. But the vision that he puts before us, the quest, is that we would truly be changed, transformed, so that we are like him, being made into his image, so that our desire is to no longer desire what we now desire. I want to no longer want what I want. I want to not think the way I now naturally think. I want to not be consumed with the selfish things that consume me. I want to be willing to do what in reality I'm not truly willing to do. I want new desires, new thoughts, to be new. I want to become someone who, when you strike me, I don't want to strike you back. I have no desire to strike you back. That when you take from me, that my heart breaks for where you're at, that you would need to do that. That when you demand that I give you my jacket, that I willingly, and say, are you cold? And not to be some spiteful jerk. Be like, do you want my shirt too? But to really say, do you need more? Do you need more? You know, it's deep within. I don't know about you, but that selfish, sinful nature is deep within, so that I can do things under the cover of being righteous while taking a dig at people and exalting myself above them. I want the Lord to transform me there, at that point of me. That seems impossible. I want to do that, where I don't have to grip my way through it. If we're to be his apprentices, it's a tall order to be the body of Messiah, his Spirit dwelling within us. Then we should be being transformed in our character into his likeness, and he is untraining these deeply embedded inclinations. If anyone would follow after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross every day. That's not natural. One of my favorite authors is named Dallas Willard. He writes this: being dead to self is the condition where the mere fact that I do not get what I want does not surprise or offend me and has no control over me. It's not that we won't feel things. It's not that we won't have desires, but we're not controlled by those feelings or desires. We don't become like zombies who don't feel passion and feel fervor, because Yeshua wasn't a zombie like that. He continues, he says, apprentices of Yeshua will be deeply disturbed about many things and will passionately desire many things. But they will largely be indifferent to the fulfillment of their own desires as such. Merely getting their way has no significance for them, does not disturb them. I feel so far off from who I am at the core of me. So here in Luke 6, when Yeshua says, when someone strikes you on the cheek, turn the other cheek. When he takes your sweater, give him your shirt too. For any of us to even begin to be able for that to happen, we must have laid down the right to have our way. For that to begin to occur, something has to happen in the inner part of me that has said, I release the need to have my way. I lay it down. I am no longer bound by that. I am free of that, of the burden of having to have my way. And I am growing in an awareness that all I need is the Spirit of God dwelling within me, that he's all I need. Can, Lord, bring me to that place daily. What Yeshua is describing here in this teaching on level ground is love that is God's love. It is love that is outward oriented. And the way we understand love, whether we realize it or not, is naturally pointed back at ourselves. We will act outwardly lovingly until, look, I did this. I don't know what you want from me. I wash the dishes, I do this, I work so hard, and I do that, I help take care of the kids. What do you want from me? I'm done. And our love is outward oriented. Too often we understand of love in a selfish way, focused what we get out of it. I love as long as it benefits me, as long as I'm getting my way. But when we are transformed, by the way, that was me. I was describing things that I used to say. I wasn't describing some random person. That was me. But when we're being transformed so that our life is reorganized, not with me as the center, not with everything flowing toward what I want, but with his will, your will, what you want, what you desire. I trust you, a God whose love is outward and giving. That's when I'm becoming who I'm called to be. When I strike back, when I retaliate, when anger and the need to exact revenge hold me hostage, I'm not being like my Heavenly Father. I'm being like the one who held me hostage. When I love selfishly, when I love only those who love me and only them, and when I only love if I'm getting something out of it, I'm not being like the one who, while we were still sinners, died for us. When I sit here and try to figure a way to be right with him while getting around being like him where it's uncomfortable. How can I be in good standing with you and still get my way? I'm not dying to self. I'm being ruled by my own desires, ruled by the baby in me, by the toddler in me that says, mine. But he is untraining us, unforming that if we will allow him, untraining us from our natural and distorted inclinations to self-defend and retaliate. I'm almost done. My third point's very short. Untraining us in the process, untraining us from the burden of having to have our own way. And in the process, we're being trained, we're being made new to love totally, to love selflessly, to love the unlovable, to be gracious and kind to the ungrateful and the most selfish of them all. It's so unnatural. Being trained to love like the Father. Love your enemies. Do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Then your reward will be great and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and evil ones. Be compassionate just as your Father is compassionate to you. Sometimes it feels like the selfish toddler within me will always rule. There are days where I go, will I ever get past being this guy? And I'm not talking about something that's acting outwardly. I'm not talking about something that you can even see. I'm not talking about, I'm doing pretty good on the outward. I'm talking about what I know of my inward. Making it go my way. How do I not be that? How? And yet, today, I say, Lord, I'm going to keep doing what you call me to do, to pray that you'll continue to form me, that I'll become who you've called me to be. Becoming sons and daughters whose character reflects the character of our Father, that takes time. That doesn't happen immediately. It's day by day, moment by moment. You don't go from toddler to graduation in high school like that. It takes years, but you got to keep growing. You can't stay where you're at. There's a cooperation with the Holy Spirit. Some of us just lay there like slugs, going, make me walk like you, Lord. And we want him to put strings on us. You know, within our theology, the word effort has become a bad word. Listen, you didn't become sons and daughters by your effort. You've been declared sons and daughters. But now that you and I have been declared sons and daughters, he says, make every effort. Make every effort. Give your will, give your all to saying, Lord, today I'm going, by your Spirit, empower me, strengthen me, but I'm going to cooperate with you to become like you. Not just, well, it just didn't happen. We are being made into his likeness. 2 Corinthians 3:18, I love it. It says, we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord who is the Spirit. You know, eventually, Yeshua's top apprentice, Peter, the one that cut the guy's ear off, wrote to a group of his own apprentices, his own protégés. And he pointed them to Yeshua first. Much older, having not who he was. You know, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I'm not where, it doesn't look like it did, but it doesn't look like it's going to look. I'm becoming. And now, later in his years, Peter says, speaking of Yeshua, says when he was abused, he didn't return the abuse. He didn't retaliate. While suffering, he made no threats. You just wait, God's gonna get you. Instead, he kept entrusting himself. There's an ongoing decision. He kept entrusting himself to the one who judges justly, who judges righteously. He points to Yeshua, and then he admonishes his apprentices. He says, do not repay evil for evil or insult for insult, 1 Peter 3:9, but give a blessing instead. What Yeshua taught there in Luke 6, sitting down and looking up, must have sounded so crazy and foreign to Peter. And yet here he is years later with what Yeshua taught has come alive in him, has been birthed within him by the Spirit of God. And it's in him and flowing forth from him. He says, give a blessing instead. It's for this reason you were called, so that you might inherit a blessing. In verse 14, he says, but even if you should suffer for what is right, you're blessed. That sound familiar? It took hold. Do not be afraid or worry about their threats. Instead, sanctify Messiah as Lord in your hearts. In that moment, set apart Yeshua as the Lord of my heart. What's the Lord of? Is the center of my heart me and my way and my offense and my reputation and my pain and my comfort, and how dare you? No, set apart. He is Lord in my heart. And I love this. Always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. This part, yet with humility and reverence. See, we go, I'm going to give you the reason. You may strike me, but let me tell you. And what comes out, he goes, give it. Give the reason for the hope. That when you're standing there and being persecuted and it doesn't have you and you're not held hostage, that we can be those who are ready to give an answer. How in the world are you like this? How are you able to respond to this? How be ready to give an answer to the hope that is within us? For I know whom I have believed, and I'm persuaded that he is able to keep what I've committed unto him against that day, that he's got me. I know that he loves you while you strike my face, while you tear down my name. Oh, so many times I haven't done that. And yet, day by day, moment by moment, right? Becoming who he's called us to be. Keeping a clear conscience so that whatever you're accused of, those who abuse you for your good conduct in Messiah may be put to shame. And again, it's that their actions in contrast to you being who God's called you to be would shine a light on what he wants to do in them. Untrain us, Lord, from my natural, deeply embedded me-first orientation. Untrain me and reorient me like you did Peter, like you have in so many, to transform us to love with the love of the Father. I'm going to close with this. Coming up, kiddo. Francis of Assisi told the story of a conversation that he had with his friend Leo. He was trying to explain to him what perfect joy is. And he's like, you'd think that it was, having everyone together and, all the brothers getting along. You think that would be perfect joy. Or maybe you think that operating with miracles and signs and wonders and seeing all this, that would bring perfect joy. Or seeing tons of people come to the Lord, that would be perfect joy. That's not perfect joy. And the guy, Leo, is confused. He says, tell me, what's perfect joy? And I just love Francis's answer. He says, and again, this is like the most unnatural thing. If when we come to our quarters, dirty, wet, and exhausted from hunger, if we are rejected, repeatedly rebuffed, and finally driven away by force, Then if we accept such injustice, such cruelty, and such contempt with patience, without being irritated, without murmuring, and if we bear all these injuries with patience and joy, thinking of the sufferings of our blessed Lord, which we should share out of love for him, there is perfect joy. If in that moment, in those circumstances, in the worst, most unjust circumstance, I can have the love of Messiah, the joy of the Lord truly flowing from within me. If in that moment I can be like him, then when everybody's together, when people are getting saved, when people are getting healed and touched, boy, that just like, I don't like cherries, whatever on top. That's just the dessert on top. That's just all better. But I've already got total, complete joy in the worst circumstances, so you can't take me down. So you can slap my face, and you can hit the other side too, and you don't have me. And you can take my cloak, but my cloak isn't me, so here's my shirt. You don't have me. You don't get to get me to become someone that God hasn't called me to be. That's who we want to become, right? So I just want to take a minute this morning. I know I've gone exceptionally long, but let's stand together and just to ask the Lord to let his words sink into our hearts. I don't want to move past what he's saying to us, because if we're going to be who he's called us to be, then we have to be ready to lay down our lives. Not just in the not in the difficult or in the easy things where everybody sees it, but at home when nobody's watching. At work when there are people who have set themselves as our enemies, to love them, to truly love them, to see them through his eyes, or transform me from that part within.